Okay. I grew up in London. I usually tell people I'm from Savannah, Georgia, but for the sake of sort of convenience and not hurting anyone's feelings, it's a lie. Actually, I grew up in London. I've lived in Moscow and Hong Kong, lately in DC, where I went to high school. And tonight I just want to talk about the trajectory of work that led me from place to place and finally to Paris. I actually started my undergraduate career at Tulane School of Architecture in a 5-year master's program. That was 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit, and I was displaced to Duke University. This is just a shot of the shed in New Orleans. You can see the water line on it. Recently I went back for a studio project and that line isn't there anymore. At Duke, well, I mentioned that I triple majored. I started by studying sort of monastic Gothic spaces. This is Salisbury Cathedral. One of the scariest moments of my life was actually climbing that spire 250 feet. It's all ladders all the way up, and that disaster is I was really interested in documenting these spaces. I'm getting a little feedback. But really how these spaces might have formed from a sort of mythic cave of the martyrdom of the saint, and then a Celtic temple, a Roman basilica, and then later to more Christian typologies, and then finally to a monastic space. I've always been interested in how space changes and representing that change. I got interested in visual studies, which is the study of the ways of seeing and studies of perception. And I got very interested in virtual reality. Luckily, you can get a grant in art history easier than you can in computer science, so I would document these cathedrals and build models of them and have people see them virtually, but in fact I'd be doing a psychological experiment, seeing how people would perceive that virtual space at Gingerbread House. So I want to talk about ways of seeing, and ways of seeing the city. Not yet though. This is my senior thesis. It's an unbuilt Gropius Breuer project for Black Mountain College in North Carolina. It's another type of monastic space. If you study the Bauhaus, it's sort of this monastic collective social experiment. It's sort of brought me from working in Gothic space to modern space and ultimately go to design school. So now I want to talk about ways of seeing and ways of reading a map as a representation of ideology. This is a pretty typical example of a map of Lucca, where it's more than just a physical representation of a city. It represents a sort of fear of the black plague or that black nothingness beyond these really heavy walls, and the city is the heart of all knowledge in the center of that. There's a modern way of seeing. Again, I don't think it's a representation of physical space. In fact, I think it's more a representation of how we, in modern terms, we tend to flatten space sort of into nothing, and we tend to represent landscape and built form as this sort of flattened, objectified thing. Creating two maps that I really like, a great comparison between the Richard Hester and the Rockies. I love that. But again, ways of seeing the city, where it's very much about marking the city with these rotundas and towers and lanterns and setting the landscape, and really this is the way that these people once perceived the city. Took me to my second year design project where this is in Florence, that pop map, and a way of intervening in the city with built form might come from ways of seeing that city. So again, in the design, you see a campanile or a lantern, harkening back to how people navigate the city instead of harkening back to technology. Brings me to my work in Paris. I started by studying maps of Paris, and again, ways of seeing the city. This is not a physical representation. The wall is not that round, but it says something about an ideology of a perfectly round city with all the world in the center. Later, during the embellishment, you see the map start to shift and tilt, really highlighting the architectural embellishment that was happening in the city. And finally, in modern times, we start to look at the underground of the city, another ideology of the city that might speak to the tourism and the sewers that happen in Paris and this sort of modern, really obsession with urban infrastructure. These are the sorts of primary documents I used in my project in Paris, and ultimately what I did was I took a big set of blocks in Paris, Real, which is the heart of the city, and overlaid everything that has ever been built on that site. So this right now is back to 500 BC. And I'm still working on it, so you can see underground subways and stuff, and all this other stuff. But Lael right now is sort of an urban blight. There's a lot of drugs being dealt there right now, probably. It used to be, though, a market space, a cemetery was once there, a monastic space, a department store, arcades. It's just been transformed over and over again throughout history, and you rarely find traces of what once was. This is one of those, this is sort of a case study, but one of the spaces that was there was a monastic cathedral. You can see it started 500, grows and grows and grows until they finally build a cloister. When Houseman comes in, he completely levels it, builds a market. Now what's there today is just a fountain. So it was once a really rich place of death and dying in the city, absolutely nothing. You have no trace of that left. And I think most urbanists agree that one of the worst decisions we've made in urban planning these days is to completely reject death and dying in the city and put cemeteries outside the walls. It's probably led to a lot of cultural problems that we're dealing with now, and it once happened in Paris. And I've missed the last two slides, but this is my project now in New Orleans again. The comparison with the last slide is terrific. But another space of death and dying, the ritual of jazz funerals that might go underneath this bridge, and ways of reading the city with an image of Venice superimposed. My last image isn't mine, but it's a flower in the school. And to me, represents the amount of work that's still being done on the project. But really, what's important to me, I think, is the trajectory from the roots of studying monastic space at Duke all through up until now.